Have you ever felt trapped by addiction or known someone who was? What if I told you that sometimes the cure is worse than the disease? This is my story. This is why I don't use anymore. Before we dive into the nightmare, tell me, where are you watching from? The streets, a cozy home, or somewhere darker? Hit that like button if you dare. Subscribe to join us in the shadows, and tell me in the comments, have you ever encountered something unexplainable? Something that made you question reality? Now, are you ready to face the truth? Then let's begin. Part 1. Welcome to Hell. The van's tires screeched to a halt, the sudden stop sending me crashing into the metal partition. My head throbbed, a toxic mixture of withdrawal and terror pulsing through my veins. The acrid taste of vomit lingered in my mouth, a reminder of the hellish journey that had brought me here.
End of the line, you worthless junkie.
The driver snarled, his voice muffled through the barrier. The rear doors flew open with a rusty screech, flooding the van with sickly yellow light. The stench hit me like a physical blow, a nauseating cocktail of decay, chemicals, and something far worse that I couldn't identify. Rough hands grabbed me, dragging me out into the mud. I landed face first, my nose crunching against something hard buried in the muck. As I spat out a mouthful of filth, I tasted blood.
Welcome to your new home.
The driver cackled, his yellow teeth bared in a sadistic grin.
Hope you enjoy your rehabilitation.
Fighting waves of nausea, I forced myself to look up at my surroundings. What I saw made me wish I'd kept my eyes squeezed shut. The facility loomed before me, a sprawling monstrosity that seemed to violate the laws of physics. Walls bulged and receded at impossible angles, windows like roomy eyes staring down at me. Rusted barbed wire crowned the perimeter, and I swore I could see shapes moving along it. Whether human or animal, I couldn't tell. The air itself felt wrong, thick and oppressive. A miasma of hopelessness hung over everything, punctuated by distant screams that made my skin crawl. This wasn't a place of healing, it was a slaughterhouse for the soul. As I struggled to my feet, movement caught my eye. A figure emerged from the mist surrounding the main entrance, and my mind recoiled at what it saw. The creature was impossibly tall, easily 9 or 10 feet, forced to duck under the doorway. Its limbs were unnaturally long and thin, jointed in places that shouldn't exist. Skin, like cracked leather, stretched tight over a skeletal frame, pulsing with some internal alien rhythm. But it was the horns that truly cemented my terror. Massive, spiraling protrusions erupted from its skull, drinking in the shadows around them. They seemed to move of their own accord, twitching and curling like sentient things. As the creature drew closer, I saw that its face was a blank mask of flesh, with only the suggestion of features. It made no sound as it approached, moving with a grace that defied its monstrous form. Behind it, I caught glimpses of other residents. Emaciated figures lurked in the shadows, their eyes wild and unblinking. Some mumbled to themselves, rocking back and forth. Others gnawed on objects I refused to identify, their mouths stained dark. One of them suddenly lunged forward, scrambling on all fours like an animal. In its hands, it clutched what looked disturbingly like a human femur, teeth marks scoring the yellowed surface. The horned creature didn't even acknowledge it, simply sweeping its arm in a languid motion that sent the feral patient scurrying back into the darkness. As the monstrosity drew near, I found myself paralyzed. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to fight, to do anything, but my body refused to obey. A clawed hand reached out, impossibly large, and clamped down on my shoulder. The touch burned through my thin shirt, and I felt something squirming beneath my skin where it made contact. The creature's blank face tilted as if studying me. Though it had no visible eyes, I felt seen, truly seen, for the first time in my miserable life. It peered into the depths of my soul, and I knew it found me wanting. Without a sound, it began to drag me towards the yawning entrance of the facility. My feet scraped uselessly against the ground as I tried to resist, but it was like fighting against a force of nature. As we crossed the threshold, the air grew even thicker, filled with the stench of suffering and madness. The heavy doors slammed shut behind us with a finality that crushed what little hope remained in my heart. Darkness engulfed us, broken only by flickering, sickly green lights that cast writhing shadows on the walls. In that moment, I knew with horrifying certainty that this was no ordinary rehab center. This was where souls came to die. As the creature dragged me deeper into the bowels of this nightmare, I caught glimpses of rooms better left unseen. Operating theaters with rusted instruments and stained tables. Cells barely large enough to stand in, their occupants reduced to whimpering shells of humanity. And always, the feeling of being watched by something vast and hungry. I wanted to scream, to beg, to bargain, but no sound escaped my lips. As we descended further into the madness, I realized that my journey into hell had only just begun.